All right, so I'm very pleased to introduce 4 different companies that we have up here. Starting from this end, we have Randall from Longboard, we have Brian from Praxis, we have Perry from Regel, and we have Carolyn from Neurocrine. Wave. So maybe we'll do a quick, brief introduction. Maybe starting from. So I think one important thing to realize is that not all biotechs are the same. They kind of grow like people. They start off small and they kind of grow into bigger creatures as they evolve and get to be a bigger company. So we're going to start by maybe talking about what a small biotech company looks like. And I think that's kind of what we as a community think of as probably a whole bunch of scientists working in the lab trying to find a cure. And then as a company grows, we'll learn a little bit about what those companies look like. So we're going to start with Perry, talking about Regel Therapeutics. Maybe could you give us a quick, tell us a little bit about Regel, about yourself, and what you guys are working on.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be on this panel with these other 3 wonderful companies. I'm a program director at Regel Therapeutics, where I'm leading our preclinical central nervous system programs. And I'm just going to go on a little bit of a story for my journey to Regel because it intertwines nicely with what this conference is all about, which is SCN2A related disorders and advancing research for SCN2A. So before joining Regel, I was a graduate student in Kevin Bender's lab, who is, some of you may know him. He's led a lot of the work characterizing what changes within a neuron and within the brain when you have a loss of function SCN2A variant. And I was privileged to be a part of that work. We made a lot of what I think are quite interesting discoveries, understanding how that changes the excitability of neurons, how that results in changes and impairments in synaptic plasticity and learning in the brain. But what I think is most important for our discussion here today is we found that if we could restore the expression of SCN2A in a mouse model of SCN2A haploinsufficiency, which mimics the loss of function variants present in patients with autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability, that we could restore a lot of the cellular deficits that we saw. And this gave us hope that we could develop therapies to potentially treat this population of patients. And that work was the result of a collaboration with another group at UCSF who was exploring using a strategy called CRISPR activation, which is a genetic approach to increase decrease the expression of specific genes within the genome. And this can be applied to a whole host of rare development or genetic disorders. And they were interested in applying it to SCN2A. And so based off of the success of that work and the work that that group was doing with other genes, the leader of that work, Navneet Matharu, founded a company, and that paired with another co-founder named Jordan Dimitshtein, who is here in the audience, and who developed other innovative methods that complement nicely with Navneet's technology, where we can restrict the cells that are and tissues that are involved, or we can restrict where the intervention is within specific cells and specific tissues, so that we can hopefully add additional safety factor to our therapies. And so, as Sean said, I'm here to provide the perspective of an early stage company that is trying to develop novel technologies for gene therapy. We are a preclinical company, which is different than the other companies represented here on this panel. So what that means is we're not yet testing our products in patients. What we are doing is demonstrating the feasibility of our technology to be effective. And then we're also generating safety data so that when we begin first in human trials, that we can be sure that the expected benefits outweigh the risks. So with that, I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel.
All right, and we'll just kind of work our way up the food chain. Brian from Praxis, maybe could you give a quick understanding of what Praxis looks like from 10,000 feet?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Brian Pfister. I'm the Vice President of Medical at Praxis. I can kind of tell you what we are based upon where I had been. So I'd been in big pharma, started out big pharma, moved smaller. And the primary reason to move smaller to a biotech is time. So big pharma takes forever to get anything done. No offense to any big pharma folk. But biotechs can move much more quickly. They're smaller. So we're about 60 people, 75 people. We're dedicated to these programs. We live this every day. we're able to move quickly from concept to candidate selection, so finding the molecules that may work, to getting them into the clinic. And so that's I think the best thing about small biotechs. It's a group of people with similar ideas, with knowledge bases that they can pull from to move so much quicker than what it would have been at Lilly or Novartis or even Lundbeck in the past. So
thank you, Brian. Randall, which is kind of considered a mid-stage biotech company. Could you tell us what a company like that looks like?
Hi, my name is Randall Kay. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Longboard Pharmaceuticals. Named our CEO is a surfer, so that's where we got our name. I'm obviously not a surfer. So I'm also a pediatrician by training, so I'm going to tell a story a little bit like Perry just did. So I trained in the 90s. I remember doing my pediatric rotations, including neurology, and seeing my first young child with an apparent seizure disorder. I remember what that was like, going through that part of training and spending all that time on diagnosis and supporting the family and going through that early part of the journey with someone. And at the end, when we finally had a diagnosis, I said, great, now what are we going to do? And you're nodding, so you know what was said back in the 90s. Like, well, we have a couple of options, but they're not very good. And it felt back then that there wasn't a lot of hope. So I've been involved in drug development for 30 years, and I've worked in a variety of different areas. I really like the approach that I think we're taking at Longboard that I'll describe very briefly. But I think there's something that's really changed over the last decade or two, and it's just that there's more hope, there's more technology, there's more science, there's more data that we have to deal with. And I'm really excited to be kind of part of this journey with all of you. At Longboard, we have a drug. It's called LP352 because we're uncreative and can't come up with a name yet. It's a 5-HT2C receptor superagonist. So you can see we still can't come up with a decent name, but that's where we are. The approach that we take is we look at precedent medicines or molecules that seem to demonstrate efficacy. And what we do is we hone in on the receptor that it's interacting with that we believe is contributing most to efficacy. And then we remove interactions through medicinal chemistry with any of the other receptors that either are known to cause adverse events or we don't really know what it does anyway. So we tend to focus on single selective targets. And we have an ongoing study. We're expecting to have a data readout around the end of this year.
Thank you, Randall. So for drug developing companies, their kind of the end goal is to get a drug approved. When they're in development, you can only access the drug in the context of a clinical trial. So what all biotech companies want to be when they grow up is to be a commercial company. And Carolyn can maybe talk about what it's like to be a grown-up biotech.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn McMicken, and I'm a director in clinical development with Neurocrine Biosciences. Neurocrine's a neuroscience-focused biopharmaceutical company, and we've been around for 30 plus years now. I haven't been there for 30 years. I've been there for about 7.5. And most of that time was spent toiling away as a biotech, trying to bring the first compound through discovery and development. And we did that with a compound in movement disorders back in 2017. And so we are a commercialized company, but we have a broad pipeline that's not just neurology. We have psychiatry as well as endocrinology. And I'm in the neurology space and in rare disease and working on sodium channel inhibitor that some of you might be familiar with, our program for SCN8A DEE. We have an ongoing trial and active early discovery research as well with some of my colleagues in the audience with interest also in SCN2A. I would say, just a quick story, because I know we want to get to the panel discussion. Like I mentioned, at Neurocrine, when I came there, I was in medical affairs, which that's the part of the organization that typically interfaces with healthcare professionals after a drug is approved. And in my prior life at another company, I worked closely with the infantile spasms community as well as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And it was through that I was just so inspired by the families and the caregivers that it really motivated me as soon as I found out that Neurocrine in-licensed some compounds that we're going to be targeting rare catastrophic pediatric epilepsies, I kind of raised my hand right away and said, I want to work on this. And that's where I've been for the past 3 years. And just super excited to be here on this panel today.
Thank you so much, each of you. I think a lot of the caregivers kind of want to understand like what a clinical trial is like and try to understand that experience a little bit better. I think the vast majority of people in here haven't been in a clinical trial. Like what is that? And this will kind of open this up for the panel at large, but when do patients have access to drugs? Like when do they have an opportunity to raise their hand to be in a clinical trial? Can that be at any time? Like any one of the participants maybe want to give a quick excerpt on what a clinical trial looks like and when our community has access to these medications?
Yeah, I'll take part of that. So at Praxis, we've got 2 clinical trials going on right now. So as mentioned before, we have an ASO, which is meant to be disease modifying for the SCN2A. And we have then Prax 562, which is a sodium channel inhibitor that's meant to also, be different than what we've seen in the past. So when we get to that point to be able to enroll into a clinical trial, we design the protocols, we write the inclusion exclusion criteria, we pick sites. And then once those sites are open, then we'll typically notify the patients that these sites are available. If they're interested, here's the inclusion criteria, here's the exclusion criteria, and then they can reach out and find out more information and really proceed down that road. One of the things that we've looked at is, how do we do this in a way that there's such a high demand and high need for medications for SCN2A in particular? There's not really anything specifically designed to treat it yet. And so then we've looked at ways to expedite that recruitment period. How do we get people in contact with the information that they need ahead of time so they can get into the trials, get treated? Like, for example, the Prax 222, which is the ASO, has, we recruited the first cohort of patients, and we were able to do that very quickly, which helps us to get to the next phase, which ultimately creates availability for the product much more quickly for the rest of the population. But again, once the sites are open, once we get those set up, then there's typically an outreach that goes to clinicians, and we'll go also reach out directly to patients and with the patient advocacy groups to connect with them. So everybody has the information so that they can get involved as quickly as possible, so we can get drugs to families faster than in the past. Thank you, Brandon.
Do you have a comment too, Randall?
Yeah, if we can add to that a little bit, to some degree, since we have an audience of family members that have family members living with SCN2A, it actually starts more with you and your interest in being involved in research than with us, because we try a lot of different techniques of reaching out, whether it's through advocacy groups like yours or through potential investigators that are involved in the study. But I'm just going to share with you sort of a line or an adage that I've gone by in the 30 years I've been involved in drug development, which is that research is part of the treatment paradigm. Research is part of the treatment paradigm, which is a very different concept when you start to think about when you're in the very early stages of sorting through, oh my gosh, I can't believe we have this diagnosis. What does this mean? It seems overwhelming from every aspect, beyond just emotionally, but it's just so incredibly overwhelming. But it'd be good to start to think about that as early in the process as possible. And being involved in research, just one last concept, doesn't mean you need to be involved in a drug study. It could mean being part of a naturalistic study or contributing your loved one's data into a registry or a database, so that people like us can share knowledge and get smarter over this journey while we're trying to come up with great treatments and cures.
Thank you, Randall. That's almost a perfect transition. Caregivers and families have an absolute essential seat at the table for developing drugs for our children. To empower the drug developers to make the right drug for our children, and also know what the indication looks like in order to there may be multiple drugs needed for our kids. I mean, that's kind of the inevitability. Maybe I'll kind of open up the panel for each group, since they are kind of different types of companies. How can caregivers contribute to your process in order to make it better? Maybe just a few words from each of you, and being from early stage preclinical to clinical trial enrolling to a commercial company, and maybe not for SCN2A, but just in general. But how do patients and their caregivers contribute to your process?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Randall said, which is participating in natural history studies and patient registries, especially for, in our case, looking at the loss of function patient population, where I don't believe that there are ongoing clinical trials for those children. That is the most important thing you can do to help create like data for us to evaluate whether or not our therapies are appropriate and whether or not we think our therapies would be effective and whether or not the benefit we can provide would be, given the potential risk profile for a therapeutic, would be appropriate for this disorder. So having as much information there is important. Also participating in academic research that is trying to advance biomarker discovery. So at this conference, there are ongoing efforts. There's the eye tracking study that's being run by Dr. Kevin Bender. I'm sure many of you have heard about this. Just participating in that is very helpful. There's the BioGene EEG studies that Caitlin Hudak is leading. That's helpful. These sorts of biomarkers, which they might not be the symptoms that your children or that are the most important to you in terms of getting them corrected, but they're an integral part of the accelerated approval process that gene therapies will need to take in order to reach the clinic. So being involved in that is very important. And then I guess lastly, participating in the patient-focused drug development process, which I believe is going to be talked about more in later sessions today. Finding out ways that you can work with the SCN2A or the family's SCN2A Foundation to be a part of that process, to really advocate to the FDA that your child's disorders are important and need medications.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback onto that. First, I want to thank the families here and the families SCN2A, because what you're doing, we're working in some other areas where there's little known about rare diseases, and you just remove a lot of barriers for the clinical process if you participate in things like natural history studies, because it helps us to better design a trial. And I think, particularly, like you said, for loss of function, or when we're trying to target more than just seizures. I mean, the seizures is a somewhat well-worn path to a drug development perspective, but participating to better understand the non-seizure outcomes and things like the Inchstone Project, they're just really, really super helpful.
Yep. Okay. So I agree 100% with what the other two colleagues have said here too. I think the biggest thing that's been helpful for us is like being part of natural histories, being able to share the information, helping us to understand you in a way that helps us to highlight what drugs can do and find pathways that are novel, that are really groundbreaking is huge. I have a son with epilepsy as well, and so as sitting on the research side and living it in some ways, it's like, I get it. Like, I get the things that are important, and sometimes they aren't always captured in the way that we traditionally have captured them in clinical trials. So being able to include that or having that component in there and being able to see that, and being able to study where you guys have been, what you've been through, and how you guys exist in the real world, because again, clinical trials sometimes are not 100% real world looking. And so the more that we can get, to understand the patient population, understand what you guys are going through, the better trials we can do, and the quicker we can get the drugs, developed. So, keep doing what you're doing. These type of meetings are wonderfully helpful to hear the stories, to understand the impact, to really feel what you're going through is amazing for me. It gives me goosebumps, because then it helps us get up and work hard at what we're doing. So, I mean, again, just be active and be vocal and tell people, anybody who will listen. That's what we did with my son. Anybody who would listen to the story, I'm happy to tell it. But it was, you got to find that advocate that also then is on the development side too. So just keep doing what you're doing in that regard.
Just a request, give us some feedback. So when you are talking with your clinician about maybe being involved in the study, if you choose that it's not right for you, let them know why, because that feedback gets right back to me. We sometimes just get, lack of interest. Give us a specific reason. It took us a while to realize that having patients come in every 5 days for a 3-week period was a little bit inconvenient. You would think that'd be obvious, but it wasn't, because it was something we were trying to accomplish in the study. But getting that kind of feedback, whether it's about visit frequency or how exhausting a clinic study day can be. And could you please try to split these up and maybe make a hotel night available between the two so that we can actually get all those assessments done? But please just give a little bit of extra feedback so that the next studies that we're putting together are going to work better for you, and for us as a company.
Thank you. I mean, we have an essential seat here, and your voice is heard loud and clear whenever we have the opportunity to speak up and talk about our children and the reasons why we want something better for our children. But one question that comes up a lot in our community is for people that do have interest, that they want to know whether my child can participate. And clinical trials are designed to be a test. They're evaluating whether a drug is safe and effective. So part of a test, there are rules for the test to make sure that we can assess it well. Brian yesterday was able to talk in detail on eligibility criteria and did a great job during the research roundtable. Maybe could you kind of frame for the community why those are important and maybe things that they should think about as they're looking at different studies?
Yeah, that's this is like kind of tale of two cities, right? Inclusion, exclusion criteria, the best of things and the worst of things at the same time. So when we're developing drugs, we need to, our first and foremost request or things that we need to do for the communities is make sure we create safe drugs, right? So we want to look at SCN2A, for example. We want to look and study drugs in that particular patient population. So the inclusion criteria typically is about 4, and the exclusion there's about 20, right? And so the reason that we do this is we want to turn down the background noise on all the things that would lead us to the incorrect conclusion. So you're going into a clinical trial saying, I have this drug, I've looked at the science, I've looked at the data, I understand how this drug works, it could potentially be beneficial. But then there's a whole host of things that can get in the way of us really understanding if it was beneficial or not. So this is where on the surface you meet criteria to be included. And then when you start parsing out some of the things that would exclude you from the clinical trials, that then becomes where the frustration sets in, because you're like, oh, I thought I could be in this trial and now I can't be in the trial. So we do that again, just to turn down that background noise so we can really detect if this drug has a benefit, and also then maintaining safety, because there's a lot of things that can get in the way of safety, through the course of a clinical trial. And we don't want to cause any harm to anybody. And one of the things that we've done at Praxis that was different than other companies I've been at is we're able to go back through and look, like I mentioned, where patients are. How do they present clinically? What do they look like? And Dennis had mentioned that, looking at the clinical, presentation of the patient on top of variants and those type of things. We also could look at the burden of the condition, like how difficult is it going to be? So if I set up 4 clinical research centers and they're not anywhere close to your house, unless you're Carson's mom, it becomes, difficult sometimes to travel. And so I want to make sure that when we design this, we could do something that would meet you where you are and create a decentralized clinical trial design, because we saw that was a major, major hurdle to inclusion. Is getting to the site is half the battle in a lot of ways. And so that became so difficult and became such a hurdle. So we were able to implement that. But based upon the information that we saw in the databases, in the natural histories, in what we heard from you, we're able to come up with an innovative new design. So, again, maintaining your voice and understanding where you are and bringing the research to you instead of bringing you to the research. So that's been our focus.
Thank you, Brian. We had a few questions come up, and there's one theme that it would be good to kind of talk through a little bit. Each of you are US-based biotech companies that are, developing drugs. Can you talk about the process and barriers as you are developing the drug and starting your clinical trials to go from the US to ex-US? When did that typically happen within drug development, and what are the barriers that limit that sometimes?
So, yeah. Longboard is a publicly traded company. Because of that, oftentimes we might be doing a whole bunch of activity, but we don't even talk about a lot of the process of those kinds of steps that we're taking. That also includes when we're in the planning stage of a clinical trial. We might not make a lot of the information all that public. So just a quick side note. clinicaltrials.gov is actually not the best place for information because we won't post our studies on clinicaltrials.gov until 2 weeks after we activate the first study site, because we have investors that are staring at us and are trying to do these crazy calculations. It's true, right?
It's true.
Yeah. Doing these calculations of when we're going to have results so they can hedge it. Is that the right word?
Mhm.
Yeah. Most companies, ours included, does them in a as close to parallel process as we possibly can. Things have got a little bit more complicated with Europe post-Brexit because we're not really sure exactly who we're supposed to talk to. So as a publicly traded company, we probably won't talk a lot about where we are with the discussions with them, but I can assure you they're ongoing. Our attempt is to do everything at the same time, but I'm curious with my colleagues if your experience is a little different.
Yeah, I would just add, generally speaking, of course, we're dealing with totally different regulatory bodies between the US and different countries and continents. So these things are, you have a whole team of people that are working on it. And often we have partnerships with clinical research organizations that also have regulatory teams working with our own to make sure all of the documentation submitted to whatever countries that we're going into. So it can take a very long time. I think things were getting better after kind of COVID slowed things down tremendously. And then now there's, new regulations all the time that also add to some slowdowns or changes in how we have to do things. So it's, like I had said earlier, I moved from medical affairs, which is all post-marketing, to clinical development, and it's quite an intricate process. We have lots of smart people working on it, and we strive, particularly in conditions that like SCN2A that are so rare, to get a broad representation across the world, if possible, of sites.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I'll make one quick comment. Like we've looked at this and looked at strategies, as mentioned, with the regulatory bodies. We have a central theme within Praxis, and it's solving for time. How do we do this quicker? So we look at this, I think, eyes wide open and say, where are the opportunities and how do we get this, through quicker to get these decisions to be able to continue to move products in development and really to help the families. So, we move pretty quick. And so sometimes the information is coming out, a little bit slower than we're moving, just because as we're organizing things. But again, we look at it from a standpoint of, are there opportunities in other countries to be able to get trials started up, get aspects of it, run different study designs than we're accustomed to in pharma. And so it's been, again, just like, what's the opportunity and how do we do this safely and effectively and do it as quickly as possible?
Great, thank you. One theme that kind of emerged in a few of your answers were, sometimes we can't say things because of certain reasons, whether those are regulatory or other components. And for any company that is publicly traded on Wall Street, there's a regulation where they can't speak anything unless it's been published by the company initially. So I think one question that comes out in our town halls and conversations with family is, I want to be in the loop more. How come I can't get kind of like live information all the time? I think maybe comment a little bit, or if you have any thoughts on just because you're not hearing things doesn't mean there's not a lot going on in the background. You're still not, racing for a cure and working as fast as you can. Maybe any comments or thoughts on that or any other compliance issues that are important for our community to know?
So I told you a problem where I said, don't go to clinicaltrials.gov. So I probably should give you a sense of where maybe you should consider going. Our two best sources that we think for you to consider, at least from Longboard standpoint, would be your clinician, who is most likely to be most knowledgeable of what studies are coming. Let me say, I know we have Boston Children's and CHOP here. You guys know it takes about 6 to 8 months to do all the discussions with starting off a study. So these folks will know, and that's typical for every institution. They'll know in advance what studies are coming and probably give you a much better sense of when that's probably going to be, because on the pharma side, we're constantly talking about study start is going to be, June 2023. Are you ready? This is when we're going to start. But we had that conversation 7 or 8 months in advance so that we actually start on time. The other source is the group here, is the advocacy groups. We like to communicate as early as possible and even give a heads up of, we're seeing this study maybe coming. We're thinking, towards the middle of next year, so that you can start to communicate with your folks that is as a possibility.
We're talking about, there's, yes, lots of rules and regulations that our companies operate under, and perhaps, in a commercialized company, even more so, we need to worry about being accused of promoting, which seems funny because we're trying to encourage people to participate in clinical research, but it can be also viewed in some cases as like pre-approval promotion. But at the same time, there's also a shifting paradigm in that we want to and need to be much more collaborative with patients and caregivers. So, we've been at Neurocrine kind of having this tension, and more recently over the past few years decided, when we talk to internally about what we can share, it's more about, here's what we want to do and let's find a way to do it. We've learned from the past of asking something and always getting a no. So we're trying to look for solutions rather than, we know all of the reasons and the things we can't say, but let's talk about, where we can push that and what we can share and get feedback from the community.
Yeah, we did. What's interesting is I think that, we always want to communicate. I tend to like to over communicate, and I know Steve's in the audience over on the side, so hopefully I don't get in trouble for this. But I like to share. I want people to be informed and know what's going on. And one of the things that we had looked at with our clinical trials is to set up a couple landing sites where you could talk to a nurse navigator. So for the small molecule, you could go to emboldstudy.com. For ASO, you could go to embravestudy.com. You get information, get connected, which helps you to stay in the loop. So when it's ready to go, when things are there, then we can, move things more quickly. But one of the things that one thing that I hate in life is to be wrong. And so we do wait sometimes to tell you the information until I'm 100% sure, because I don't want to be up here and say, yeah, we're going to do that now. And, oh, guess what? We're not going to do it now. We're going to do this other. So I just want to make sure we're right. And I want to make sure that it's accurate. And then you can make your decisions based upon the information that we provide. So that's a commitment, again, I have to you, is to make sure that the information, and working with Sean and working with the other advocacy groups to make sure that they're looped in on what decisions we're doing. And we're, again, trying to move as quick as possible, but I do not want to be wrong. So I want to make sure it's right for you guys.
Okay, thank you all. But one thing I did want to bring attention to is the Carolyn's comment that things have been changing where we have a bigger voice. If you look back 10 years ago, this wasn't how drugs were developed. They used to be, the biotech companies just did what they wanted and hoped that there was a patient population at the end that worked. And nowadays, they're here in front of, 300 people, many of which have very sick children, wanted to hear your voice, wanted to hear your perspective to make sure that they're developing the right drug in the right way. So it's great to have a seat at the table as a parent. But one question that came through, maybe for Perry, as being the one company that's still preclinical, what are the steps that go into kind of going from preclinical to clinical? And I know that's a complex question, but maybe help just our families understand what levels of validation and what's important for you guys to see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, this is a journey that I think we've been on, a lot of us coming from academia into the industry side of things, where in academia, really what you're interested in is developing new technology and new science and showing that things are feasible, and evaluating the potential of a technology. That is still important once you're on the industry side of things, but suddenly safety is a much bigger consideration, right? As it's, you can try a lot of stuff in a mouse that is absolutely unethical to try in humans. And so in order to advance to the first in human dosing, especially of a product such as a gene therapy, it's a one-time treatment, which has the potential to provide transformative benefit if it's effective at a single intervention, but it also can be permanent And it can be highly invasive depending on the delivery route that is used. So we need to follow a highly regulated process to demonstrate the potential to provide meaningful benefit. So this is like when we talk about the patient-focused drug development aspects that these natural history studies are help contribute to. We can evaluate whether or not our therapies have the potential to provide that meaningful benefit, and whether or not it will offset the potential risks that arise from the therapy. And the way you establish those risks is you do rigorous toxicology and safety testing in animal models. And then you very, very carefully move from those studies after you get FDA IND approval, that's the process that you go through, investigational new drug, to explain the 3-letter acronym. And only then can you can begin doing clinical trials. So it's the FDA provides a lot of regulation, but it's to keep you safe. It's to keep your children safe.
Thank you, Barry. We got about 5 minutes left in the session. So I just want to open up the door for each one of our industry groups. If you have any closing words for our community, anything you want to say to, at a patient advocacy group conference.
I'll start. I know there was one thing we didn't touch on, and I want to emphasize it takes a village to bring new treatments for your children. It's not just your help, and of course participation is important. Our teams within our respective companies, and then even in addition to that, I alluded earlier, is we have all of these collaborators. It's your study physicians, it is contract research organizations. It's a lot of people that we're working together collaboratively to make a difference. And we appreciate your participation, also your patience, even though I know time is of the essence. And we definitely appreciate the feedback and input that we get to make everything as seamless as possible.
Well, to the participants, thank you for letting us be part of this journey with you and teaching us and letting us learn from you. And to the organizers, thank you for the lunch, but particularly not the adult lunch, but the children's lunch table where there are chicken fingers. It's the only time I can get away with sneaking a chicken finger. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. I was going to say, just in general, it was brought up before. I think Carson's mom had said, you know your kids better than anybody else. Be the advocate for them, and I think that holds true even into drug development. So when you have questions, ask the questions. There's no stupid questions. I can give you a stupid answer, but there literally are no stupid questions. So please ask away. Be involved. Fight for what you know, and believe in what you're doing. We're here to help you as well, and we want to hear those pieces of feedback. Again, even within our Praxis company, we have 2 of the founding members have kids with SCN2A mutations. So this is something that for us, genetic epilepsies is really a passion of ours. So please ask any and all questions you have, and we'll get you an answer.
And I guess to wrap things up, I'll finish the way I started, which saying it's an absolute privilege to be here. This is my second Families SCN2A conference, first time again as an academic, and then now from a different perspective as someone who's trying to develop a drug. Being involved or meeting patients and being involved in these sorts of family outreach, it's incredibly grounding and incredibly motivating. And so I just thank you for everyone who's come to talk to us, to ask us about what we're up to, about our research. It really helps motivate us, and drug development it's a long and challenging process. It does take a village, as was said earlier, and you guys really provide the motivation to us to keep going and to invest in disorders like SCN2A. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys. Very nice.